again to the Outside Insights podcast. Our goal is to provide content and ideas that help you close your personal and professional gaps by hearing how others have done it. I'm your host, Chris Burkhardt, and today I'm thrilled to have a longtime friend and entrepreneur, Tom Embley, on the show. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to be here.
Thanks for being on Outside Insights. So I feel like I grew up with you in the entrepreneurial side of things. It's dates us a bit, but I love a great founder story. So how did you get started? How does a mechanical engineer end up building precision air convey?
Yeah, boy. I hope you got a couple hours.
We
and a
do.
couch.
We got plenty of film. We're good.
Okay. Listen, at an early age, I realized that I probably wanted to go into business at some point. I graduated Delaware, and the class superlatives. Graduating engineering back then, it was actually a cut on me that the superlative I got was most likely to go into business because we're all engineers, so it's all about staying in the career. So somehow I let off that vibe, and I took economics classes as electives and things like that. Just a lot of interest. But I got very fortunate that my first job was in a small family-owned business. I actually got hired right out of school. One of the senior design professor at UAD was a minority shareholder in a business that was up in North Jersey. They were looking for an engineer and offered me a job, and I went to work there.
Okay. So right into the technical side of the engineering to start.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
Okay.
But because he was a professor and he was technical as could be. The other partner was kind of the business side, but they didn't have any internal engineering in the business, and they wanted somebody to kind of start establishing guidelines, documenting what they were doing. So 8 years there. I was the first full-time employee in the business. There was a couple of businesses that shared employees there, shared phone systems, things like that. But I was the first person hired specifically for this business. And did the engineering side, but also always kind of went to the other side of the business. So I was there 8 years. And in that time, I became the chief engineer, had a staff working for me, running operations, and the number one sales guy. Right. So getting in at the ground level, I learned all the development of the business, and look, I didn't own the business. Wasn't responsible for the P&L or the balance sheet, but I was on the daily side operating the business.
Did you?
Had a falling out with those guys at some point. Came home from work one day, and without getting into all that, said to Mary Ann, my beautiful wife, we got to make a plan. I got to get out of here. And it took us 2 years. And I still gave him my heart and soul every day. But we put together a financial plan so that I could leave there, which I did, and started a competing business.
So Tom, I think that's a really important, just something to reflect on, because I had a similar moment where I was working for somebody else, and I came home to Kim and said, I got to get out. And she said, you're going to do it right. And I left in 16 months. So I think that's really important. And first of all, now I know how you ended up as an entrepreneur. If you're employee number 3, you grew that business and grew up as you grew that business.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
Yeah. When I left, the first words the majority shareholder said when I gave him, so the professor was coming up from Delaware. He didn't like one of the engineers that worked for me. We were in North Jersey. He wanted to fire him, and he was my number 2 guy. And I'm getting ready to leave. Right? Yeah. I'm not sure when, but I'm getting ready to leave. And I'm like, I can't let them do this. I can't let them fire this guy when I'm on my way out the door. So he came up, and we're having a strategy meeting about letting this guy go. And I said, listen, I got something I got to share with you guys. And I said, I'm getting ready to leave. And the majority shareholder said, man, I never thought you'd leave, which that was his first mistake. And this minority shareholder said, well, we're still firing your number 2. Anyway, I worked my way out of there. I said, I'm giving you 6 weeks notice. They talked me into giving them 3 months notice, which I did. I wanted to leave on really good terms. I was just going in to start a one-man show. The timing wasn't that critical. I wasn't hiring people and things. But I left and started a competing business. Like I said, I grew that thing for 4 years, became a pretty decent competitor to them. Not as big, but a pretty decent competitor. And, Chris, you know this. You've been through it. You run out of money. You're growing so fast, you run out of money, right? Yeah.
You know, I've often said on the show and in life that great leaders, good character people can find money. However, it's not always in the timeline that you need it,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like, go get the home equity line when you don't need it, right? And,
Yep.
it's a business metaphor too. Go get the business loan when you don't need it. They won't give it to you
Absolutely.
when you need it. And by the way,
Absolutely.
banks don't like the risk. They don't want you to use your credit line to scale your company, right? They don't
Right.
want perceived, I don't know what they call it, but they're not an equity partner. It's not worth the risk.
No. No.
Interesting.
So that was 4 years in. Yeah, when you get into banks, you get in as a small business. You're part of their small business program. You don't have to collateralize loans. You're just mixed in with a big group of liability.
Yeah.
Whatever you want, almost like insurance.
Yeah, they're mitigating risk by having a large group, right?
Thank you. Yes, but then I started needing real money. So now you're going into mid-sized business, and all of a sudden, like, well, what are you going to collateralize this with? So over that 4 years, the guys that I left had approached me twice and said, "Why don't we merge our businesses? You can run it, Tom." And I'd said, "No, thank you." They came along again. The timing was good because I had run out of money to grow my business. So I ended up buying out that University of Delaware professor, and with my equity and buying his equity, ended up with 50% of the business, which now I was part of a family of entrepreneurs, lots of money. Wasn't going to have any problem investing in the business.
So just addressing lots of things in there. I knowing you, you made it seem easy to sell the business, to like learn that stuff. Who'd you count on to help you? Did you navigate that yourself? Did you have good counsel around you? Did you have good mentorship to help you when you did that? It's just curious because those are the things that screw up other entrepreneurs. It's like, I can't do that by myself, or I don't have those connections.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in getting support. I'm a big believer of somebody else has done this.
Yeah.
Somebody else is better than you at this. At my core competencies, I think, this is going to sound arrogant, but I think I'm one of the best in the world at my core technical competencies. That's about a box about this big,
Yeah.
you know.
To the radio audience, that's like an inch by inch box. So yeah, he's been pretty humble, but he's the best in that inch by inch box. So
Yeah.
there you
Yeah.
go.
So I always try and find people to support me. Now I was young. I was young in my business ownership career. I really didn't have the resources around or know them. I found some and they were pretty good. In retrospect, I wish I had better resources, but it was a whole lot better than me doing it myself, for sure.
Point is, you learned a whole lot by doing it, which makes you better the next time, which is all a part of this journey. You know, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. Thanks for sharing that because that's such a popular question that I get. Like, how did you find these resources and how did you trust them? And how do you know what you're good at? And how do you know what to delegate or outsource? So appreciate it. All
Yeah.
right. So that's entity still exists. What's the next part of this journey?
So like I said, I wish I had done a little more due diligence up front. It turned out that my partner really merged because he didn't like running a business, but he still wanted to make a good salary and benefits and really not contribute to the business. Contribute his sweat equity time to the business. Capital, yes. But then you shouldn't be drawing in my opinion, you shouldn't necessarily be drawing a salary if you're just on the capital side. So there was tension there. That went on for a lot of years. I was carrying a lot of debt because I had to finance buying out that minority partner. And Chris, I had the home equity line. I was smart enough to get that early, and I would borrow on it every month to pay my monthly nut on my loan to buy the business because I was living on my salary. And at the end of the year, hopefully there was enough of a distribution to wipe that loan out and start again the following year. So it was a lot of pressure.
Tom, did you ever think that you would be taking those? Did you view that as risk or did you view it as opportunity?
Opportunity, 100% opportunity. Yeah. If if you're looking at it like risk, you're going to have a hard life in the business world. You have to evaluate your risk.
Yes. So I'm not sure everybody would know what we both light up when we say opportunity. When I said it, what does that mean to you? Define that for everybody. What do you think that is?
Well, when you just say the word opportunity, I think about endless
Yep.
expansion. You know, like
Endless
I don't know where
expansion,
this is.
endless equity, endless distribution, that you think in terms of abundance, that it
Abundance
was
is a good word.
it was a worthy investment in order to someday have more.
Yes. Yes.
It's a really important part of this because a lot of folks view it as risk. Well, it is risk, but they get hung up on that, right? Like, but then they wonder how we got here. They wonder how,
Right.
people eventually make it with a business. There has to be a moment like that.
Well, there's a lot of them if you're starting a
Yep.
business, and I will say that in my personal life, meaning I guess my family, but everybody in my professional life that works with me has heard me say a dozen times. People think that I'm a risk taker. I'm really not. I'm a calculated risk taker. I'm not betting on the lottery. I'm doing the math. I'm doing the calculations, and I'm deciding that this is a calculated risk that's worth the opportunity. I'm not winging it, you know.
So hopefully you don't mind if I add this. And if this is more me than you, fine. But I think you'll agree. In a way, you're betting on yourself. You have belief in your confidence. You have belief in your abilities. You have belief in what you're capable of. And that part of that calculation is, and this is just where the house I grew up in, it's better to take this risk yourself and control your own destiny than have someone call you in Friday morning at 9 o'clock and say, I just don't need you anymore. Right. Like better to have your own risk.
100%.
So, yeah, we're on the same page as usual.
Yeah.
All right. Where do we go
So,
from here?
fast forward 10 years. And I was pretty frustrated at that point. Had young kids, didn't mind all the investment in the business, but that I was doing it all on my own without my partner's help. And he was sharing the same compensation as me. And I really hadn't got it in the head, Chris. I mean, I was paying down that debt, but I still had a long way to go. And
It wasn't exponential. You were just following a
yeah,
linear path. And, Tom, I hope you don't mind the interruption in the dialogue. But one of the things I think I come across a lot in coaching folks in business situations, that there are a lot of folks in partnership that have that level of disagreement between the value of labor and money. And I don't have the answer. Only partners have the answer. But what I know is that it needs to be discussed and decided in advance.
yes,
And most of us end up, who the hell thinks of that? Right?
right.
That's what I think.
And when I look back in retrospect, there were some signs in the negotiations that I should have recognized it. Especially having worked with this guy for years before, and him pretty much giving me the reins. He introduced me to somebody once when I worked for him and said, "Well, Tom does everything. He's the reason I get the golf 3 days a week and the weekend." And so but I was naive. I was still young.
Well, actually, that
Anyway,
feels kind of good when we're young. Every entrepreneur needs a Tom to run their business. It's just
yes.
maybe not so sarcastically, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. So I went to him at some point and said, "Listen, I'm out. Here's the deal. I'm buying you out." So somebody came along and made us an offer on the business. And I saw it was a generous offer and they wanted me to run the business. So they leave me with a minority share, a small share to run the business. I ended up with some coins in the bank and my partner turned down the deal. He said, "Well, why would I do that? I'm making all this money doing nothing. Why would I stop?" Literally said those words to me. Why would I stop doing that? And so I'm a pretty emotional guy. And
yeah,
not in that moment. I stepped away, right? Like I said, it took me a couple years to leave. I stepped away and then I came back after talking to my team, my consultants, my business consultants stuff and said, either you sell me your shares or I'm walking away. And this is where his family brought the value is that they were signed on all the papers for all the loans and everything. And he said, "Well, you can't walk away. You've got too much debt." I said, "Larry, I've got nothing to cover this debt. They're going to walk right past me and come to you, the bank. I don't have cash, right? My house is mortgaged. He said, fine, then I'm going to run the business. And I said, well, I sat with the leadership team before I came to this meeting and told them I was having this meeting with you. And they said, well, if you go, I'm going, Tom, because I'm not working for him. So you need to make a decision. And he's finally, after, a lot of emotional negotiation and back and forth, he agreed to sell at the price that we had been offered, which was heavy. It was more than it was worth. But in return, what I got, and there's a good little side thing here. In return, what I got was he said, well, I want to keep 10%. I want to ride your coattails. I said, that's fine. But if you're going to keep 10%, then you're on the line for the company debt. And he agreed to that. So for 10% ownership, very unusual, right?
Yes.
And the guidance in there is get good counsel. I hired an attorney locally with a lot of business experience. This guy was always cheap, my partner, and he was hiring people getting bad advice. So we had a groundwork for a deal before he hired a good attorney. The good attorney comes in and says, we're renegotiating this. I said, not anything that's already been agreed on. You can get into the details, but we're not changing this. So was able to hold on to that deal, which was huge for me to grow the business.
One of those life moments.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. So I have to ask, does that make him the co-founder of your current business?
His father founded that business. So I founded my business. His father founded the business I worked for. He then inherited some of that, became a partial owner. It was two brothers and a dad that I was in business with, really, not just this single guy.
Gotcha.
And so he was, yeah. It, when they all got bought, when I bought him down to 10%, it was only he that was still in it. His brother and his dad
Understood.
were out. Yeah.
Understood. So it was like starting over again, or did you feel like you
Yeah,
had
but
momentum and a push start?
I mean, it was a good starting over again, right? Because I had a very successful business. I had a great client base. I had recurring revenues, and now I was doing it for me. I had just signed up for a whole lot more debt,
Yes.
but now I wasn't just covering my nut. I was paying that down. I could see it was a 10-year debt,
Yeah.
but I could see it, and it wasn't debilitating. I was making money. I was enjoying a good life. I was putting some money away. At the same time, I was able to pay
The
down that debt.
dollars were proportionate to the size of the business and the deal, and the business could pay it through cash flow, which is a
Bingo.
wonderful thing.
Versus the first deal that I accepted, I signed up for. I was treading water for a lot of years.
You
Yeah.
know, I think it's Jobs that said it. Someone said, well, something about Apple, and he says, there's nothing like being an overnight success in your 18th year. I think I've got it about right. Like, so thank you, but I think there's an awful lot to be said for the lessons we learn, experiences we garner, the skills we do when we start businesses and go through the things that you've done. No wonder you are who you are today. Those experiences gave you, the what you needed to do what you do now, right? I mean,
No
that's
question.
that we don't often think in those terms, but I think it's a really important premise, guys. Put yourself in a situation where you've got to grow, where you've got to learn, where you've got to try these things and get good at leadership or sales. I mean, for goodness sake, you were technical that you realized that you liked leadership and sales just as much or more.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I
Interesting.
wouldn't say I like sales. I got a lot of training and learned how to do it well, but that was never an area. I'm an introvert. I'm not a people person. I have learned those skills.
Interesting. No, I think I know that. I think I'll retract that, right? Like sometimes as an entrepreneur, as a founder of a business, there are things that we're good at that we don't necessarily love doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
but we do them, right?
because
So,
that's the job.
how many years you've been an entrepreneur at this point, if you don't mind? You can generalize.
I started in '96, so whatever that is, I went on my own in '96.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Tom, harder to start something, scale it in the middle, or run it as CEO when it gets a little bit mid-market? What do you think? Do you have an opinion there?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Move on to the next question. The best answer of all. It's all hard.
Well, the beginning's really exciting, right? So it's hard. I was fortunate enough to get wins early,
Okay.
and so it's very hard. It's a lot of hard work. When you think about the scale of the wins are very small, right? But they were
Yes.
wins, right? And so I'm building something. So it's very exciting. There's the risk for me, and it all depends on your perspective. The risk to me was minimal. When I came home and said to Marianne, who has been an incredible partner to me in this business, I get emotional saying it.
Yeah.
She said, "Why not? You can't work any harder than you're working now," which it turned out I could, but
There's
you
another
can't
gear.
work. Yeah. She's like, "You can't work any harder than you are now or be more vested. So you might as well do it for yourself." And Tom, I'm a nurse. You're an engineer. If this thing fails, we have both got jobs.
So I'm per- sharing something that, like, this is the most common thing that I end up working with people on, is like making sure the support network around an entrepreneur is supportive and whole. Like, what a gift. I had a similar scenario. Do you know I started my business the morning of 9/11, of all things? Like, and it wasn't even polite to talk about for many years. Now that it's been 24 years, I can say
Yeah.
what the what. But yeah, so I mean, that the point is, you got to lock it down at home, and you got to have that support, because it gets really hard. And that's what you need, man. That's what it's got to be if you're going to make it. And you probably would say that's why you made it. I would say that's why I made it. I had that kind of support too.
And I still had a family, right? Like there wasn't the resentment. You know, my kids didn't learn from their mom that daddy's away too much or this, and it was, I came home to a welcoming, loving family. Now, I coached my kids growing up. I did all those things, but I spent 3 weeks of every month traveling, Monday to Friday, and for a lot of years. It's getting a little. You're getting me to open up here a little more than I thought I would. But when our first was born, and I was the christening was coming up, and I was doing a startup on a job for Procter and Gamble in California, Oxnard, California, where they make Bounty and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And it wasn't going well, the startup. I mean, it all worked out fine, but there's always bumps. And so I was supposed to be home Friday, and it's Saturday, and we're still working on it. And the christening Sunday. Well, I caught the red eye home on Saturday night. The christening was in the afternoon. I went to the christening, went to the family party, and then caught a flight back Sunday night to California to finish the startup. And when I got home from that trip, Marianne said to me, "Listen, you got to make a decision. You got to make a decision whether you want to be a father and a business owner or just a business owner." And it was probably the best thing that counsel she's ever given me in my life, because she forced me to make that decision, right? To consciously make that decision. Why I want to be a really good husband and father, and I want to be. You can do both. You can decide to do both.
You know what, Tom? There's a moment where you don't think you can,
Yeah.
but then you realize you do have the choice. Mine was, my kids are 30 and 28 today, and I come home from my version of that business trip, and I look on the fridge, and there's a picture that my 3-year-old son had drawn, and it was the Burkhardt family, and it was our dog Tess at the time, bless her, his big sister Hallie, and Kim, but there was no dad in the family.
Yeah.
So Kim didn't need to lecture me. I just had to look at that every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really mean it. The vulnerable part of it is that you realize I didn't think I could risk. I was too afraid. Those very people that we're talking about, I wanted to work hard, so I made it for them.
Right.
And I confused that,
Right.
and I was 38 when I learned this lesson, Tom, and I'm not 38 anymore. You also can't pour from an empty cup. You reach a point physically and mentally where there's a toll as an entrepreneur, right? Like, or a business owner, where you got to operate differently too.
Yeah. I wish I learned that earlier. I wish I always made the investment in my family. I wish I learned earlier to get it. I prided myself on my ability to get to get up in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep and work for a couple hours and then go back to sleep at 4 in the morning till 5:30 or 6 or something. I thought that showed how great I was, and I wish I learned earlier that that you don't need to be always on. I
And
would have been better.
ultimately, most of us that made it with our businesses were because we were pretty good generalists. I learned recently that the term generalist is from generals, because generals in the army are the only ones that are allowed to be generalists. Everybody else is a specialist.
Yeah.
Well, I think that applies a little bit in our worlds. Like, we had to do everything, right? And
Yeah.
then to make it, to become CEO, we have to learn to want to be a CEO and then get things done through others and operate completely differently.
Yeah.
Hey, tell people what your business does today. If they've been patient with us, we're 30 minutes in, and just tell them what your business does. What problems does it solve for your clients?
So our primary business is in the industrial sector, and it's companies that make paper, plastic packaging, everything in the grocery store that's in packaging, from the shredded cheese to the safety seal on the Cool Whip to the Purdue oven stuffer to the bags of potato chips. All that packaging, the company, not the companies that make the food, but the companies that make the packaging for them, they generate waste. And I had mentioned Procter and Gamble, like Bounty and that and Charmin stuff. Well, they generate waste when they're producing that stuff. Depending on what that waste is, we design and build a system, and we sell them a system to either just process the waste and get it off the production line, turn it into fuel pellets, recycle it so they can feed it right back into their raw material stream, or like I said, just get it off the line and send it to a compactor where they'll take it to a landfill. So that's our primary business. That's what pays the bills for sure.
Are you picking up the waste as well, or just the machinery?
At their place, we pull it off of the production line,
Got it.
in line, process it, turn it into something, and deposit it. So we're not doing the recycling or reprocessing, but we're designing it and building and selling the system so that they can do it at their facility.
I've always admired, you say you're an introvert, but I've seen you in character a few times where you've been a leader in your business and recognized and rewarded. But what kind of company do you like to run, culture wise and philosophies wise? It's just, how do you make sure it shows up every day in your business?
Chris, that is our secret sauce. So, which I'll share. It's not that secret.
Well, they
But
can't duplicate it anyway, Tom. Let them listen.
I don't think it would really matter what business I'm in. The value of our business is our culture and our people. 110%. Um, so and I learned all this. Well, my greatest example was the company I came from, who
Right.
had a horrible culture, didn't appreciate its employees. So I knew I wanted to do it. But then learning how to do it was, I'm not a big reader. I mean, I'm more about diving in, going to seminars, finding peer groups, listening to speakers. I'm all about learning. And so over time, I learned how to create that culture and then reinforce it. The culture isn't what's written on the wall. The culture is
Right.
what the people are doing every single day. And we talk about it on a regular basis. And then once a month, every month, we report out to the whole company down to the gross margin line. So all the numbers, right? What was our revenue? What was our order intake? What was our warranty? Down to the margin line. And the leadership team does that well. The only slide I present in that whole meeting is our core value slide. And I get juiced up talking about it, right? And if there's some new employees, I say to the group, I say to the whole team, and why are we doing this? And somebody will, they've heard it enough times. They'll say, to reinforce and should give us examples of what we can do in everyday decisions. So what we do is we talk about where we lived our core values that month and where we didn't.
I like that you talk about where you didn't. I like that.
And that it was really hard to make that happen because everybody loves to point out where somebody lived the core values. Hey, so and so stood up and
Yes.
helped this customer, which helped me with this.
Yes.
And so, and integrity is one of one of our values. And so there's
So
a lot
I'll
of
tell you what,
integrity.
Tom, in the liner notes, if you have any documents, we can list your core values so people can see them if you're comfortable with that.
I am. Yeah,
All right,
I am.
cool.
But the integrity is that people will come forward and say, hey man, I didn't really live our values in this situation, or the company in general didn't live our values in the way that we didn't support this customer. One of our values is to develop and long-term relationships, do things that with for customers that are going to help to build long-term relationships. And hey, you piss a customer off, that's really not
Not a
helping to
good
build a
start.
long. What's that?
Not a good start, right?
Yeah,
Not a
right.
not a good in the middle, but it's how so I was always heard leaders embed culture. So my simple brain is when you stand up and do that, it matters that the co-founder and president of the business talks about values, right? Recognizes rewards and talks openly about values, failure or mistake. Like that's pretty amazing. And kind of a big deal. So that really appreciate you sharing that. And that speaks to, is it Drucker that said culture eats strategy for breakfast? I think it was.
Yeah,
But
I'm
if
not
it
sure
if it's
what I mean.
not, if it's
Yeah,
not, it does, right?
yeah,
Um,
it does. It does. We were acquired. Now I'm a minority shareholder in my own company, and we were acquired not for our core business because of this other part of the business that we got into, and this company in Sweden found out we got into it, and they want to get in North America, and they bought our company, and
got it.
or a majority of our company, and so now they're looking to expand my business around the world because my margins are better than theirs, and my cash flow's better, and blah 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 blah. So I'm now the president of the North American region for the business, and I'm in Sweden at a meeting of all the presidents, the group presidents, and the president of Asia is there, and we're out to dinner, and she's one sharp woman. Right. And she's asking me about my business and how come my margins are so well and blah, 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 and trying to figure out how she can take my product line and make bank on it, right? For the
Yes.
company. And by the end of the dinner, she says to me, so your success and value in the business, in your business, is the culture you've created. It's not the products. So I can't just take your products and duplicate your success. Yeah, I'm probably not interested in selling your stuff, right? Now, it was humbling, right? Like, wow, this woman just figured out for me, because I didn't really understand that value, to be quite honest. Like, till somebody told me what I was doing, right? It was a little humbling to have somebody else tell me that or educate me on it. But she was dead right. Like that's why we got a big multiplier. That's why, the whole 9 yards was on our culture.
And not that you want to tell your M&A or your exit or your purchase stuff, but that's what he's saying is the value of his business is the behaviors of his people through culture that are beyond Tom, right? Like the business has legs and life beyond Tom because of the culture. And that is I think that's somewhat eye-opening, but it's got to make you feel good. I was working for my dad, Tom, and a Dutch company bought that business, and he flew over. And this is service staffing, low margin. And he flew over and he kept saying, well, you must hire like MBAs and PhDs. No, that's not it. Well, you must be using better technology than everybody else. Well, no, that's definitely not it. Not compared to your multi-billion-dollar business. And finally, the national chairman or international chairman walked away and said, I can't duplicate your culture to get that kind of results. I can't, unless you're willing to do this around the world, you're not doing me any good. And he walked away. So I think it's common, and it does speak to, what you built. It's hard to do, but when you do it, man, I think it's a hedgehog effect where it just keeps moving, right? It's got its own centrifugal force, if you will.
It does, but you gotta hit this flywheel once in a while, right? To make sure that and I think that's what we do on a monthly basis by touching base where we lived our values, where we didn't live our values. Yeah, yeah. Or you can lose focus.
Oh, I agree. All right. So we've got a lot laid out there. You're a good storyteller. You've got lessons. Is there other things you'd like to share? I was going to ask you if you got a favorite book, but maybe it's a favorite place where you've gotten good business stuff from that, you might reference? Seminars, webinars, peer groups, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's a few things, Chris. The one book that I have continually used is Vern Harnish's Rockefeller Habits. One, it's a really quick read, but it basically just lays out
This one?
some yeah, yeah. There's Vern. Yep. It lays out some of Rockefeller's philosophies and even just practices. I use some of the practices and they have been incredibly they're easy and incredibly powerful. And I've had really good leaders come in here of being skeptical of what we're doing and then just gotten totally on board. Like they see the value of some of these simple things.
I
That's
forgot
one
that
thing.
you and I are both scaling up fans.
Yeah.
Breaking it down, is daily huddle one of the things, or meeting rhythms one of the things that you like about scaling? You tell your story. What tools do you pick that you think help you run the business?
Well, that's number one. We have a
Okay.
daily huddle and we're small enough. We're less than 50 people that literally the entire company is on that huddle every day. So it's not this huddle moves up to the next level of huddle. It's everybody is on that same call and making sure that people are mentioning roadblocks because people think roadblocks are a vulnerability. Hey, I'm not getting my job done. No, dude,
I'm failing.
you
Yeah.
can't do your
I'm in
job, right?
trouble. Right. By the way, that's pretty hard to get people to openly talk about the roadblocks. Like that takes that consistent support. We got to behave a certain way. You got to encourage it.
Yep. Safe environment. Yep.
Yeah, you're not surprised, Tom, because you've been hanging around this stuff. There are so many leaders that think that they can't get their company to do this daily huddle. It's such a mental block, but it's so freeing. It increases communication so much.
It's incredible. And then once in a while, I'll point out to people, do you see what just happened here? We weren't going
Oh,
to get this quote to this company this afternoon because so and so can't get a number on this. But when he brought it up, the engineer at the end of the table said, well, I did something similar to that 3 weeks ago. I'll give you the numbers. So I make sure once in a while I point out how effective
we just prevented 7 emails in 3 days on this one, right?
and got a win for the customer, right?
And
Like
got
it's,
win.
you know,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. So that's a really good book, especially if you're early on and just learning some practices. I'm incredibly big on peer groups because, well, Chris, I really do very little business in my geographic area, right? Business is
Yep.
Newark, Delaware. I don't think I even have any customers anymore in Delaware. My business is all over North America. And so I'm not plugged into the local economy, into the local accounting professionals, lawyers, bankers, so, and even if I was having a peer group and learning who they value, and I'll tell you, it kept me from losing my business back in the big crash of 08, that peer group and talking to my peers that my bank's pulling my credit line and I was able to find credit. I think it was tied to the mob, to be totally honest, at 17%. Right? Like, well, I can't make the monthly nut on a 17%. I'd be like, I went home one night after I had a meeting with the bank and said to Marianne, we might lose this thing. I thought I might lose it after 9/11, but it was, I didn't really think I'd lose it. I could see the potential to lose it. 0809 was the only time that I really was like, I might lose this thing. But my peer group turned me on to the people it was incredible how people had accountants that had relationships with the bank I was with who were respected by the bank, took over my finances, represented my numbers, didn't cook the books, represented them in a way. And the bank said, oh, you're not a risk anymore. I was infuriated because I changed nothing. My business model didn't change. I presented my numbers differently, which then took me out of a risk category for them. And they said, yeah, we'll keep your lines open. But it was the network of my peer group that made that happen. And I got several, that's the big story, but I have several stories like that of being connected with people. The building I'm in, the company that owned this building they're a big time not developer but landholder here
Sure.
in Newcastle, and they were trying to get me to rent it, and I knew they were upside down on their mortgage. They were holding out. One of the guys in my peer group says, "Why play tennis with him every week? You want me to call him and tell him you're walking away from the deal?" The owner of the development company. So we're in a peer group meeting. Lunch comes. My buddy goes and calls the owner of the development company. Dude, by 2 o'clock, I got an email saying we're ready to move on your deal. It was all because of and so I created a network through a peer group, right? Which is easier for an introvert than going out and meeting all the time. So I'm a big believer, and I've been in several in my career.
That's such good stuff, man. Because, well, first of all, I can't help but think about 08, 09. We're not just old. I think most of us that are still operating businesses today, the playbooks we're using today came about from what we learned in 08, 09. I'm sure you'd agree with me, and all of us were hanging by a thread. But you're helping so much because all of us professionals, doesn't have to be entrepreneurs, are trying to figure out I always talk about, do you have a top 20? Like, do you have 20 people you can call on that can help you in the middle of the night, know your story, and they'll do anything to help you, personal, professional. But folks, a peer group is a great way to do that. And you got to invest. I'm sure Tom had to help that group too, right? He's got to make connections, but you do it because you know people and you have this shared experience. That's incredible. Now, I couldn't have got through the pandemic without a staffing industry peer group, frankly. I
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
in one
amazing.
in 08, 09, but that I wouldn't have known half the government stuff that was going on without
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
And in seminars, right? Like I work with ITR, the economists
Sure.
and they do a phenomenal job of forecasting my business based on the U.S. economy, and they're accurate. So relying on other people, I've seen people come into my peer groups who really come in to get validation of how well they're doing, not to learn or help the group, and they don't last very long. But I
Now,
like to think they're the big fish in their little pond. So there's nobody to help reflect on decisions, results. So you're so proud of yourself when you figure out a solution. We all are. And it's unfortunate if you don't realize that somebody else has even a better solution than you do.
one of the things you've always said, Tom, is if somebody else has the template, if somebody else has the process, let me see it, right? Like I entrepreneur, we have a tendency to all recreate the wheel, but I think you do a nice job of looking around and seeing how you can apply what exists. I think you taught me that 20 years ago, frankly, because I'm that guy that likes to recreate, have his own approach to something, but it's really, really relevant. So we can go a lot of different directions, but I'm going to ask you one of those zinger questions, if you will. And I just did a blog piece that a lot of people have talked about where my last 50 guests, I asked them this question, Tom, and it's, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Wow, that's easy because I know my 21-year-old self wouldn't take it. Stop being so damn arrogant and recognize that everybody has something to contribute to you. Everybody, right? I mean, we don't get to where we are because we're not on our game, right? But to think you're all that is, I worked at that company and they did do some nice things. I never appreciated anything they did. I was always worth more than what they paid me. And there was a point when that was true, but I was arrogant as, man. Yeah, I'm keeping it clean, Chris.
No, perhaps it's common. We reach a point where the reviews start to say arrogant, flippant, glib, right? Like, so my guess is the unplanned question is, I found what changed for me with that point is when I had my first failures.
Yeah.
I don't mean to give you the softball, right? But like, I was exactly that until I went into my first recession, until my business had its second bad quarter in a row. Like, I didn't just
Yeah.
hockey stick it. When my stuff didn't work,
Right.
I guess that's when you learn and you start seeking help.
And I had those like 9/11 was, your story's better than mine. You went on into business on 9/11, but I took all the money I had and invested in an international trade show in Dusseldorf, Germany that was in October, only to get the American companies, because it was the biggest show in the world, only to attract the American companies that were going to Germany to to see who was in there. Well, there was not one. Nobody was on a plane except for my team to go to Germany, and I took all the money I had is extreme statement, but I
No, but
invested.
it was a big marketing move.
Yeah. And we were so excited about, that was our machine. We invest in marketing and it drives leads, and we have the sales team that can convert those leads into orders. And I was never afraid to invest in marketing. And that was the most I'd ever invested. That show was, since the biggest in the world, it wasn't cheap. And then flying equipment and people, and we stood there and looked at each other. It was an 8-day show. We stood
Great
there and looked.
great team building opportunity, right? I
Yeah.
imagine you were like, "No, I'll eat in my room."
Yeah.
No, I'm not taking you all out. You start thinking, "How do I recoup this?"
Yeah. Yeah. But that had a big Marianne, whenever we're talking to people, Marianne always brings up that, not just that story, but that time as the worst time. And it wasn't. It was, so 2009 for me. It was after everybody else had hit bottom. And that's about when I started working with ITR, or slightly after. If I had ITR, I would have known that I was going to look great when everybody else was crashing, and that I was going to crash after everybody. It happened to do with
Tom,
capital equipment.
is that the forward 12 that
Yeah.
is that what is that right?
Yeah.
Like they have that.
Yeah. And
ITR is a great economic group out of Vermont. I think they just merged with somebody, but they've got great content for those. I'll make sure that their website is in show notes.
yeah, they're fantastic. But I was the smartest dude alive in 2008, because, and this is just my opinion of myself, right? I wasn't, because everybody else is struggling and I got bank, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm smarter than all these other business people. And then 2009, February of 2009, my legs just got taken out from under me. And that was so humbling, and really, really took away my arrogance of I can always win. I know what I'm doing. Like, it humbled me in a really positive way to then build growth differently, build more substantially, foundations and things.
On June 30th of '08, we were an $8 million business and growing, and a top 20 in our field. And by August of '09, I was down to $1 million revenues.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's
Well, that's
crazy.
sort of the story, is like, I did fine out of the gate and thought, yeah, this is no big deal. We're still adding contracts, right? But there was a lot that happened during that time. That was where nobody hired for 3 years, Tom, right?
I can't imagine being in your shoes.
Well, through the ashes, that's where placers came back. Every Tom Embley of the world said, I'm not hiring direct, but can I use a temp? And I said, nah, I don't do that. But don't you own the business? Yeah. But so it took me about 9 months of starving to realize I better listen to the customer. Like, that's the really
Yeah.
important part. And then it ate my other business, and it's 30 times, of what that little business was. So
Yeah.
those are good stuff, but I love that you're sharing it. So, all right, we're coming up on the hour. We've covered a lot. You got great stories and insights, and this is valuable in so many ways. Any other things you want to weave into today?
I just constant pursuit of determination, and find the positive, because you can always find the negative in business. You can always find the challenge, and you can let the challenge beat you up, or you can make the challenge bring you the invigoration you need.
Tom, you've always been half full, but do you think it's by the experiences of solving the problems that gives you that edge too? Like, I can do this because I built upon yesterday's learn and fixing 3 days ago mistake and 20 years. Like, I often think about that. Like, but you just got to start.
What you're saying is the reason I look. All these people who work for me are way smarter than me. The advantage that I have
I can
is that
confirm that. That's true. That is a true statement.
now I'm better looking than all of them, but
Yeah,
that's,
right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Right. Of course.
yeah. I can say that because this is a radio, but Um, but I've got the experience. I'm the old man with the experience. So I don't have to be as smart as them because I've made the mistakes and learned from the mistakes and built the experience. And the half full thing, I got a COO who's just so great. He's the half full, I'm the half empty guy. He loves telling this story. We were the supplier, and he was saying, "Oh, Tom's the half empty guy, I'm the half full guy." And the supplier said, "Yes, but if you put the two glasses together, you got a full glass." And I said, "Yeah, but then you got an empty glass sitting right next to it, right?" And so he loves that I pointed that out. But
I love that.
but it's not, the half empty is not a bad thing. The half empty is recognizing that you've got to do things to fill that glass. And one of the mistakes I made in my career as a leader for a long time was not celebrating the wins, Chris. So that, I'd set company goals and we would hit them. And instead of celebrating it with the team, I'd be like, okay, now we're moving on. Now the glass is half full for this, and not acknowledging that we got wins, that we did incredible things.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad you shared that. There's a top 10 list of things leaders and entrepreneurs and founders learn. I mean, there's so much on that topic. Like, what's that notion? Like, I think the visual picture is like we get out in the rowboat, right? And we start rowing towards the horizon, but the damn horizon keeps moving, or we keep moving the goalposts on everybody, right? That's really what we do. All right, we scored. Well, let's move the goalposts another 20 yards, right? Like,
Right.
so recognizing, and what you probably want to do is be mocked for it. You probably want to be teased for being the guy that does the celebration. Like, come on, let's set the next. I'm not as good at it as you, but I get teased when I do it
Yeah.
because everybody wants to. I think it's natural to want to move towards things. I think confidence is an advantage, and you've worked awful freaking hard, right? But to me, it seems like confidence has been a real edge, and there's a process that you've gone about to get it through experience and by putting the right people around you, right?
Yeah. I've never lacked confidence. Um, I and I know people that struggle with confidence, and it is such a huge advantage. Yeah, I've walked out of meetings with my sales manager, who's now been with me like 18 years or something. This was early on, and we'd walk out of a meeting where we just got a big order, and he'd say, "We've never done this before, have we?" And I'd be like, "No," and I didn't tell the customer we had done it before. I told him how we were going to do it, and we'll figure out how to do that. And again, that's that calculated risk. It wasn't, I'm not that confident or cocky that I just say yes. But I sit there in that meeting and I say, okay, we can figure this out. And we do it.
My team teases me all the time because our forecasts are always about headcount and temporaries and people. And they always say that, like, we've never done this number before. And I said, well, we had never done last quarters either, or the quarter before that. Like, do you understand? Like, don't freeze on that. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, if you're building towards something, you might be doing something you hadn't done before
Yeah.
or done that way, right? Tom,
We,
it's like talking to an old friend, and I've known you 5 minutes for 25 years, but we've always had great dialogues.
yeah.
I think you've been open and honest, and I hope the introvert in you didn't mind the sharing. I think you offered some lessons and some insights that can only come from a lifetime of doing it. And I think we've just given folks some great things to think about. And I'd love to have you back, and we can focus on some things around leadership, or focus on some things about what it's like to get your business ready for sale, perhaps. But I really enjoyed having you as a guest today, Tom, and I hope you'll come back.
It's been a lot of fun, Chris. I didn't realize how easy this was going to be to just sit and chat with you. It's been really fun. Yeah. Thank you.